Disband. That's the only thing the ATF is authorized to do under the Constitution. But in order to get from where we are today to where we want to be, and for us, that's a real land of the free, we first need to understand some essential principles behind the Second Amendment. And in this episode, I've got 8 of them from the founders that are almost totally ignored today, plus a bonus one at the end. Advice on firearms from Thomas Jefferson to his 15-year-old nephew that I hope you'll stick around for and check out. But first of all, welcome and thank you for joining me here on the path to liberty. My name is Michael Bolden with the 10th Amendment Center, and this is the show for Wednesday, June 12th, 2024. And let's get right to this. Now, these aren't in any particular order, but I think I did my best to organize them into a flow that makes sense. And I want to first start out with this is the foundation. The right to keep and bear arms is a natural right. St. George Tucker, in his view of the Constitution of the United States, put it like this: this may be considered as the true palladium of liberty. The right of self-defense is the first law of nature. Now, that was in 1803, but we also have the same type of mentality, same type of message coming from some of the leading principles, the leading writers and speakers and orators and activists of the American Revolution. For example, the father of the American Revolution, Samuel Adams, put it this way in The Rights of the Colonists in 1772. I like that he starts with among, because we know this is not an exhaustive list. It's kind of a tip of the hat to our friends over at the 9th Amendment as well. Among the natural rights of the colonists are these. First, a right to life. Second, to liberty. Thirdly, to property, together with the right to support and defend them in the best manner they can. Now, there were no limits on how they determine how they are going to defend them. And Samuel Adams points out that these are evident branches of, rather than deductions from, the duty of self-preservation, commonly called the first law of nature. So the first one is the right to keep and bear arms is a natural right. Now, since your rights come from your creator and not words on paper, referring to your natural right of self-defense, your natural right to keep and bear arms as your Second Amendment right, couldn't be more wrong. So number 2 is, well, the Second Amendment is not your gun permit. You are. You have these rights, whether it's the right to keep and bear arms or so many other rights, not necessarily just in self-defense. As Samuel Adams said, there are many of them. You have these because you are a human, not where you're born, not what government has to say. You have them, and government is always going to try to get in the way. So number 2 is the Second Amendment is not your gun permit. You are. Number 3 is my second favorite number behind number 10 is 0. And, well, that's the number of federal gun control laws that are authorized under the Constitution. 0. Not a single one. This includes all of them on the books, past, present, and future, whether it's the National Firearms Act of 1934, the Gun Control Act of 1968, its amendments in 1986, the Undetectable Firearms Act of 1988, the Bump Stock Ban of 2018, the so-called Safer Communities Act of, I think, 2021 or 23, who knows what year, and whatever they try to throw at us in the future. These are all unconstitutional from the moment they enact them. Now, how we deal with that is another story. I'm going to touch on that in just a moment. But here's Theophilus Parsons. Again, if we're thinking about the right of self-defense as being an evident branch of the duty of self-preservation, the first law of nature, well, and the right to keep and bear arms is part of that. Theophilus Parsons in the Massachusetts Ratifying Convention, one of many who had this type of approach, selling it for ratification, and one of the Federalists, he said, no power was given to Congress to infringe on any one of the natural rights of the people. Notice that word infringe. Now, they weren't debating amendments there in January and February of 1788 in the Massachusetts Ratifying Convention, but certainly they were looking at attacks on your liberty as either an infringement or many times they called them invasion. In fact, the real invasion they all want us to ignore is the invasion of the federal government on the powers reserved to the states and the people, and the invasion of all governments on our natural rights. So again, no power was given to Congress to infringe on any one of the natural rights of the people. And it barely passed for ratification there in Massachusetts. And this was a very powerful statement. I think it was literally the last day of the convention, and a few people flipped and they got it passed. And this is one of the things that sold them on this. And so if there are no powers delegated to them on the federal level, we also have to think of number 4, that local restrictions on your right to keep and bear arms, your natural rights, these are also a violation of your liberty. And here's how Mercy Otis Warren put it. She said, self-defense is a primary law of nature, which no subsequent law of society can abolish. And there are many state constitutions that have restrictions on violations, restrictions on government violating your right to keep and bear arms. There's a few out there that are not that good either. Here, California, Illinois, New York State, for example. But if we're thinking about things from the mentality of a free people, we have to take the position that no government has the right to violate our liberty. James Wilson, one of the leading legal minds of the time, here he is, one of the first associate justices on the Supreme Court. He put it this way: the defense of oneself, justly called the primary law of nature. You can see a little difference here between what Mercy Otis Warren says. She says it's a primary law of nature, and James Wilson calls it the number one. So we can debate over that if we want, but, we get the point here. The defense of oneself, justly called the primary law of nature, is not, nor can it be abrogated by any regulation of municipal law. So number 4 is local restrictions on your natural right of self-defense are also a violation of your liberty. And number 5, there are actually, 4 primary reasons for the Second Amendment. We all are told that they're just for hunting, of course, or we were told earlier today that the only reason that the Second Amendment exists was to protect slavery. These are the views that some people tell us, or it was only to empower or have the National Guard have the right to keep and bear arms. It's just a collective right. But the founders told us over and over and over various reasons why they supported the right of self-defense, the right to keep and bear arms, and the Second Amendment. There are 4 of them. 1, it helps promote, of course, the individual natural right of self-defense. 2, it guarantees to the states a militia power of their own to balance the military power of the federal government. The founding generation, the old revolutionaries especially, were fearful, disdainful, hateful towards large, permanent standing armies. Some of them had those types of views against all standing armies. So they really wanted to prevent the need for having them. And whether it was James Madison or Alexander Hamilton or so many others, they told us that the best way to prevent people from saying we need a large permanent standing army is to have a provision in the Constitution which would make sure that we have a well-armed, well-trained militia. That is, the body of the people all bearing arms. So then you don't need that permanent military force, which, they had to deal with. They had just gotten out of a long, bloody revolution. They understood the problem with this. So that was number 2. Number 3, it was adopted to support the people in their defense against foreign invasion, but also it was, number 4, a defense against domestic tyrants. I covered all those 4 main reasons in another episode from a couple of years ago. That'll be linked to in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. Now, all of these 4 main reasons for the Second Amendment really required that the people have the kind of weapons needed to get the job done. It wasn't just about having a musket or a handgun or something like that, or just one rifle. And people tell us today, only the military can have certain types of weapons. But if you're supposed to be able to defend against a standing army, you have to have the type of weaponry that's needed with the times to be able to defend against that. Here's how Tench Coxe put it in 1788. Their swords and every other terrible implement of the soldier are the birthright of an American. So number 6 is all the reasons for the Second Amendment, for the natural right of self-defense, means that the people have to have the proper weapons to do the job. And that means military-grade weapons, not just what they call, not consumer stuff. Now, for those of us who have studied the founders, studied the old revolutionaries, Tench Cox's view is not surprising at all. We understand that the Revolutionary War, the War for Independence, ended only about 5 years before he made this statement. And if Americans had not possessed military-style, military-level weapons, they would have lost. And so all the founders understood this. This was incredibly essential. James Madison kind of had a tip of the hat towards this in Federalist number 46 as well, when he's saying, like, look, there might be a situation, we can think of it, where the Fed's trying to use all kinds of power against the people of the states, but if they're super well armed and well trained, they're not going to be able to pull it off. And he said it may well be doubted whether a militia thus circumstanced could ever be conquered by such a proportion of regular troops. Those who are best acquainted with the last successful resistance of this country against the British arms will be most inclined to deny the possibility of it. So Madison is also recognizing that, well, like, look, we've had a military level of armed population here, and there was a reason for it. Without that, they would have lost to the British. Now, all these original source documents, I've got a couple other episodes, articles, etc., will be linked to in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. Alan Mosley organizes every blog post, and I get it published a couple of hours after the live stream is done. You'll also find all the different platforms we're on. Of course, we live stream over at YouTube and Facebook and X and LinkedIn and Twitch, the mainstream ones. We also live stream over at Odyssey.com and Rumble.com, and I really like the communities that are building up on these so-called alt platforms. We also archive the video version in as many places as possible, Brighteon and BitChute and elsewhere. And then we have the audio-only podcast edition on every platform that at least I can think of getting us on quickly and smoothly. But if we're missing from something, please let us know, whether it's a comment in the archive or an email, team@10thamendmentcenter.com. Again, that's 10thamendmentcenter.com/path-to-liberty. And while I'm here, I do want to say a quick hello to everyone out in the live chat. I appreciate you being here. Whether this is your first episode or you've been here for every single one since day one, and we're going to get back to these reasons or these foundational principles behind the Second Amendment in just a moment. There's Gypsy and Brewster and Dennis and a few others over on Rumble. Thank you for being here. On Facebook, YouTube, and elsewhere, I've got a couple of different apps that I got to pop back and forth to till I get this fully figured out. There's Nicholas and Brewster again, Haji, Jessica, Liberty Revolutionary, Czar, Kirk, and everyone else. I'm just scrolling through as quickly as I can. Again, I appreciate you being here. Please continue leaving comments, whether it's live or in the archive. That will help trigger the algorithm of these mainstream platforms and tell them to show us to more people. There's Melody and a few others. Thank you again for being here. Let's get right back to it. So we were on the first 6 of these. Now, the next ones I think are also just as important. The founders certainly understood, number 7, that disarming the people was the very definition of tyranny. This is what tyrants do. We know, for example, today in history, on June 12, 1775, General Gage told the people of Boston, if you think of the timing, this is just weeks after the shot heard around the world, give up your guns and give up your friends, basically turn over Samuel Adams and John Hancock because they're so horrible that we can never give them any freedom whatsoever. We want them dead, really. Give up your guns, give up your friends, and we will give you peace. Now, I think the old revolutionaries understood that being disarmed meant you would never have peace, so they basically said no deal, and they passed a great document in response, the Continental Congress in July of 1775. But this is what tyrants always do. Tyrants always want to make sure that the people are disarmed because, well, if you think about those main purposes for the Second Amendment and the principles behind the natural right of self-defense, if you're thinking about not only hunting and personal self-defense, but defense against foreign invasions, if the militia is supposed to be the first line of defense, as General Henry Knox said to George Washington, his plan for the militia was supposed to be the capital security of a free state, not a standing army. The first line of defense to the founding generation was always supposed to be a super well-armed and well-trained general population. So what's the way that tyrants prevent them from defending against foreign and domestic tyrants? Well, take away their ability to defend themselves. And George Mason kind of hinted at this as well in the Virginia Ratifying Convention in June of 1788. He said to disarm the people. He said the British Parliament basically took the position, and we know that's what they did. To disarm the people was the best and most effectual way to enslave them. Noah Webster in October of 1787 had the same kind of view. Before a standing army can rule, the people must be disarmed. And so many people who support the right to keep and bear arms, who claim that they're Second Amendment supporters, they really miss the connection between a well-armed population and a small or no standing army whatsoever that the founders had. Now, they weren't all in favor of zero standing army. You have people like Samuel Adams, was okay with a small one, or George Washington, who wanted to garrison a few troops on the frontier, but nothing even remotely close to what we have today. And so many people tend to miss that essential part of it. We're talking not just about an individual natural right of self-defense for person and property and family, but also for the community. This is where I guess the collectivists kind of partly wade into the right direction, but they also miss all of this too, is for the community to be able to be the line of defense against tyrants, whether they're foreign or domestic, because tyrants will use a standing army, whether it's the old school style or militarized federal agencies of today. You have to disarm the people. And Noah Webster understood this as well. St. George Tucker, that Palladium of Liberty quote, he followed up with this. He said, "Wherever standing armies are kept up, and when the right of the people to keep and bear arms is, under any color or pretext whatsoever, prohibited, liberty, if not already annihilated, is on the brink of destruction." Man, this should say it all right here, because this is exactly what we live under today. We have standing armies, the largest empire, the largest government in the history of the planet. And it's not just the professional foreign policy, the global police militarized standing army. We also have these militarized federal agencies that shouldn't exist, which are armed up like a standing army as well, and they act like they are one as well. So we do have all kinds of standing armies kept up, and the right of the people to keep and bear arms has been prohibited in many ways. Some people will say, okay, we're Second Amendment supporters, but they don't talk about all the stuff that's been on the books for decades, because the Second Amendment in full effect means zero. There are no federal gun controls that are authorized whatsoever. So St. George Tucker with a very important warning. For number 7, the founders understood that disarming people was the way that tyrants established complete despotism. Now, number 8, I think, might be the most important one here. Then again, all of these are the most important to be. The way to protect the right to self-defense, our right to keep and bear arms, is not about getting on our knees. In essence, figuratively, that's what the people generally do. When you get on your knees and you ask the government to stop the government from doing what the government was never supposed to do in the first place, you are really just begging for scraps. This is not a free people. This is not a people living in the land of the free. This is people living at the will and pleasure of their ruler. So whether it's going to federal courts in the hopes that the federal courts will tell the states to stop doing something, or the federal courts will tell the federal government to stop doing something, a free people, as Thomas Jefferson put it, claim their rights as derived from the laws of nature and not as a gift of their chief magistrate. That's what a free people does. So we, the people, need to learn how to exercise our natural right of self-defense, whether the government happens to give us permission to or not, because it's not liberty if it comes with a government permission slip. Here's how James Iredell, another early associate justice, one of the first ones on the Supreme Court, so Iredell and Wilson, both nominated by President Washington. Here's how he put it in the North Carolina Ratifying Convention. The only resource against usurpation is the inherent right of the people to prevent its exercise. You can see kind of echoes of what Samuel Adams was saying back in 1772. We have these natural rights, And among them are these: life, liberty, property, and the right to support and defend them in the best manner that they can. This is the right of the colonists, of the people. These are inherent natural rights. These are from the duty of preservation. Attacks on our liberty are really attacking our right of self-preservation. And so James Iredale is saying this is an inherent natural right of the people to stop government from attacking our liberty. Roger Sherman had a nice take on this as well in the House of Representatives in 1790. He said, "It is the privilege of every citizen and one of his most essential rights to bear arms and to resist every attack upon his liberty or property by whomsoever made." And this is the way to protect the right to keep and bear arms, is to stand up and, again, exercise our rights, whether the government gives us permission to or not. That's our top 8. And I also have this bonus one that I mentioned that I think is really fun, that I haven't mentioned much in the last year or two, but I think it's pretty awesome because Thomas Jefferson was also a big supporter of the right to keep and bear arms. And he thought young people should be well trained and well armed, because if your whole childhood has absolutely nothing to do with the right of self-defense, like my childhood unfortunately did, when you become an adult, it doesn't feel natural to it. I was often very afraid of guns and wanted to be kept away from, that's only for weird people or people hunting deer. That's the only time I ever thought of it. Or bad guys, because I was propagandized by the socialist government-run school system that shouldn't exist either. And so I thought that the only good people were government and military. Those are the ones who are supposed to have the right to keep and bear arms. And the people themselves, well, no, I mean, you better go through a big process if you're going to get this. And we're going to verify that just a few people are going to be okay with this. But Thomas Jefferson thought not just the adults, but children should be learning these important things. He had a letter to his 15-year-old nephew, Peter Carr, in 1785. And here's how he put it: "As to the species of exercise, I advise the gun. While this gives a moderate exercise to the body, it gives boldness, enterprise, and independence to the mind. Games played with the ball and others of that nature are too violent for the body and stamp no character on the mind. Let your gun, therefore, be the constant companion of your walks." So Thomas Jefferson is telling us that a 15-year-old should be conceal or open carrying wherever they go. And he said you should do it a few times a day. Always carry, always have it with you, always practice your marksmanship. Forget about sports, because this is what you should really be focusing on. And that's a mentality that I don't think too many people have with young adults today, and maybe there's a problem that's been missing. Anyways, I hope you guys found this interesting. I hope it was educational. More important than anything, I hope you learned something. If you want to help us spread this kind of message, these foundational principles, to more and more people, there is nothing that helps us do this work more than the financial faith and support of our members. You can join us for as little as $2 a month of that dirty government fiat. Please consider throwing it our way over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. We also have annual, 5-year, and lifetime options. We were told a number of years ago by one of Edward Snowden's attorney that we're really punching above our weight class with the amount of impact that we've had for our size and scope is really far beyond anything that I ever could have imagined. And the only way we're able to do that and continue growing and expanding and taking a stand for the Constitution of liberty is with your help. Again, 10thamendmentcenter.com/members. While I'm here, I want to take a quick look over in the chat and see if there's any comments or questions I can get back to. Well, there's a Sarah over on Rumble. Good to see you. Someone's talking about the right to travel. I saw a comment earlier, I think from Lewis, that said, this is just total side note, has nothing to do with the episode, but someone said, of all the great ideas from the founders, daylight savings is not one of my favorites. I think it was Benjamin Franklin. I'm wearing one of my favorite quotes from him on my shirt. I think he was the guy who came up with the idea for that one, but I agree with you on that one, Lewis. Let me take a look and see what else. Nathan says, notice too what he advises should be read. If we're talking about the source documents, I want to point out again, we'll link to these all in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/path to liberty. So if you're on the live stream, we'll get that published in a couple of hours. If you're listening in the archive, You can just go over there and you'll be able to find the links, all the original source documents. So you can read this in context and learn more on your own time. You don't want me just blabbing it at you. You want to be able to understand exactly what we were talking about, what they were talking about during these ratification debates and in the rights of the colonists, etc., and understand it so you can share this information with more and more people yourself as well. Again, I appreciate you being here. Hope you enjoyed the episode. Hope you learned something that's more important than anything, and I hope to see you next time here on the Path to Liberty.